Hi, I'm Edward Funk, and this is podcast number 45. But before I jump into it, this book, Behind the Door, The Real Story of Loretta Young, is now available as an audiobook. So run to your computer to Amazon and order it. This podcast is about Loretta having a psychic maid, and then plus me being a major interviewee when A&E did their biography of Loretta. Now, Loretta had two successive maids while living in Palm Springs. The first one looked the part, and as Loretta stated, she served beautifully. This meant that when Loretta rang her little bell, the maid's comportment and serving a dinner party was movie perfect. However, she wasn't much of a housekeeper, and Loretta eventually suspected she was toady, meaning that when she was shopping for Loretta's groceries, she included items that went to her home but stayed on Loretta's bill. Now, the second maid was Maria. Incidentally, that's not her real name, but I'm sure she wouldn't appreciate me talking about her, so I'm giving her a new name. She's from San Salvador. She was an immigrant, and she was as white as she was tall. She didn't serve beautifully. It wasn't high on her priority list, but she was a wonderful cook and an excellent housekeeper. And most of all, she loved Jean-Louis. Loretta swallowed hard, accepting Rosa's rebellious attitude and focused on how well Rosa took care of Jean. One day while I was visiting Palm Springs, Loretta said to me, "Ed, I have to tell you something very strange. Maria, I think I outed myself. Her real name was Rosa, and I thought I changed it to Maria, but now you know it's one of the same person. Anyway, Ed, I have to tell you something really strange. Maria told me about her dream last night. She was standing on one side of a river, and on the other side stood a conversation which Tom told her things that were so personal it would be impossible for her to know." Loretta concluded, "I don't know what to make of it." So was Maria psychic? It sure sounded like she had some paranormal abilities. I had continued sending my books to publishers, and by this time, I'd lost count of the rejections. I needed some reassurance that eventually all my efforts would pay off. So later that day, I asked Maria, "What did you mean? What do you see in my future?" The look on her face conveyed that my question was bothersome, and for a moment, I didn't think she intended to answer. Then she replied, "I see you working in the service of children." I thought, what? I have no interest working in the service of children. I'm a writer. I dismissed Maria's reading of my future as a misfire. But here's a little peek into what turned out to be my future. At age 56, I went back to school and studied to become an RN. Then my whole nursing career was to work on a pediatric psychiatric unit. Maria's prediction could not have been more accurate. In the summer of 1979, A&E Cable TV announced that they were going to do a segment on Loretta for their biography series. I was asked to participate, as were Loretta's son Christopher, and her daughter Judy. I initially thought that Loretta would see this as a hostile situation since the Clark Gable story could not be avoided, but surprisingly, she gave me the go-ahead to participate. It was an interesting experience. I was first interviewed by the producer and assistant. Both of them were younger than myself, and we sat at an outdoor cafe along the Sunset Strip and chatted for a couple of hours. They said that they'd be happy to have me and asked if I'd be okay without having questions in advance that would come across much more spontaneous if it were done that way. Well, that was fine with me. Now, the interview actually took place in a hotel suite. First, I went to makeup, administered in the bathroom, which was a strange experience. The guy wanted to draw eyebrows on me, saying that my eyebrows were so light that no one would ever see them. I replied, yeah, they are so light, no one ever has, and I'd look weird to my family and friends if all of a sudden I had eyebrows. So forget it. And he did. The interview on camera lasted a couple of hours. The tricky part was that even though they continued asking questions, I was never to respond as if I'm answering a question. I was always supposed to sound declarative as if I'm initiating the topic. So here's an example. If they asked, what was the happiest time in Loretta's life? I'd say something like, Loretta was happiest in her professional life during her television years. That's when she felt she did her best work and had the most influence over her work. She was happiest in her private life 20 years earlier, when she was the object of pursuit by so many men. She was and continues to be an incurable romantic. Now, interestingly, if they asked Judy any questions regarding Clark Gable being her father, and this was after her book came out, they didn't use any of that material. Same with Chris. It seemed that they saved that dicey topic for me. The day we were filming, a production assistant was trying to help me shape my comments regarding Loretta, Clark, Judy into a more romantic mode. I responded that what she wanted really isn't what happened. She replied, well, I think it's important for Judy's sake. Every child deserves to think if they were conceived in love. I thought to myself, where does the truth come into this? Just like the book publishers, truth seemingly could take a back seat to the story they wanted. Overall, I felt like I had navigated myself through the interview by being honest and yet discreet. However, apparently I wasn't discreet enough for Loretta. I learned from Chris's wife, Linda, that Loretta felt I'd really said too much, but she never personally took me to task. Now, it may have been that same visit that Loretta asked me to help her with a project. She had individual, professionally shot photographs of her children, and she wanted them hung in the hallway leading to the bedroom suites. Now, guesswork was allowed. Everything had to be measured to perfection. I had never seen these pictures before, and asked why she decided to hang them now, as she'd already been in the Palm Springs house for several years. She said that she wanted Judy to visit, and she felt Judy would be pleased. The 1985 reconciliation between Loretta and Judy had proved incomplete. There was no further acrimony, but as Loretta observed at the time, the hurt had ran deeply for both of them. I was glad that Loretta was gearing up to make another attempt. Now, on Maria's day off, this is in Palm Springs, Loretta had attempted to rustle up something for brunch. Through the kitchen sliding glass door, she could see Jean sitting in a lounge chair out in the garden. It was his favorite place to be. From there, he could look beyond the crescent-shaped pool, over the wall a deep pink bougainvillea, and beyond to the massive San Jacinto Mountains. John would study all the colors in the mountains, ever changing with the time of day. This was particularly true as the afternoon shadows were starting to cross. It was not unusual for John to drift into a nap, and not unusual for her to come out and gently wake him when she feared he was getting too much sleep. Now, as she approached, there was something unusual about the position of John's body, as if he had attempted to stand but had not been able. She touched his shoulder to wake him, and when he opened his eyes to look at her, something wasn't right. Loretta thought he was having a little stroke. He had had them before. And she said, John, I'm going to go call 911, and I'll bring back some ice packs. When she brought the ice packs and placed them around John's neck, his head turned slightly in response. Then Loretta realized that she wasn't wearing her hearing aids, and that she would need to go inside. She needed her hearing aids so she could hear the buzzer on the gate to let the paramedics in. Soon, the squadron of paramedics arrived and was by her, rushing to Jean. Loretta was asked to wait in the kitchen, and within a few minutes, a paramedic came to her. Loretta asked, my husband's had a stroke, right? The young man paused for a second and, taking a deep breath, said, oh no, Mrs. Louis, your husband has passed on. Loretta stood up and shrieked, no, that can't be. The paramedic held her very gently while she cried. At the time of Jean and Loretta's third anniversary, which hadn't been too long before this, Loretta confided to Sally, her sister, that she'd never been happier than since her marriage to John. After John died, her family and close friends were somewhat taken back by the depths of Loretta's grief. It wasn't that they questioned Loretta's love for John. It was just no one had ever seen Loretta so vulnerable. And I'm going to add my 2 cents here. I think the reason Loretta was married to John were her happiest was this was a period in her life when her focus wasn't on her. It was no longer about her. She had someone to take care of, and she was very determined to do that well. So she got out of herself and she was happy. On another occasion after Jean died, Loretta asked me to clean out some file drawers with John's belongings because she had new use for those drawers, and by clean out, she meant throw out. I asked her if I could keep anything I found interesting. She said, sure. Now, there were a couple hundred of his sketches. And he did this in the days when he had his own label and sold women's clothes through department stores. There was also a number of photographs as well of French magazines which carried stories and photos about Jean. Now, the most interesting thing I found was a treatment for a book John's wife Maggie had written. The intended book would be in Maggie's voice, but tell the life story of Jean Louis. Now, the most daring thing she wrote about in her treatment was that Jean had prepared a wardrobe for Marilyn Monroe as she was preparing to spend a weekend with John Kennedy. Like my own book, Maggie Lee never found a publisher. So that's it for tonight. Ciao.